Hey, all you good folks out there in the land of plenty. It's Monday, January 12th, 2026. 2026 equals 10. The great reset's upon us. Interesting numerology as we look to flip the switch on those dipsticks trying to control the world with their retarded, I'm going to say all the words, retarded gay antics. Um, but no, it's I'm feeling good about 2026. There's a lot of good energy right now, at least in the circles that I'm cohabitating with, and that's maybe just because I got a lot of badass friends that are free thinkers and doing things to bring people together that are outside the box. And as I said in a recent little post on Substack, really the counterpunch to this techno state, surveillance state, panopticon that they're the wannabe controllers are setting up is unconventionalism, going into the inner world, the inner mind, the ability for an individual to use the creative imagination to ascertain whole new concepts and ideas, new passions, um, and then to develop communities around people that are weirdos to flip the switch once again and on this really sort of dark age we've been in for decades of conventionalism. Really, I would say one could say since all of 20th century. I guess if you really wanted to be cynical, you could say we've been in the dark ages for thousands of years. But um, really, I guess it's a state of mind, right? And this idea of an age may just be a categorical bias that we like to apply because of, of just intelligent um, mind think, right? Instead of more heart based, intuitive knowing. And what I mean by that is just letting the intellectual brain try to categorize things. However, it does seem to me that cycles exist, and we very well could be in the midst, or really the tail end, possibly, of a dark age. And obviously, the signs are all around us. The barbarians have broken down the gates, taken over the cities of the West. Um, we have extreme technocratic, corporatist control in the East in places like China that are somehow a lot of these economic kind of people, proponents that are specialists in global macroeconomics are saying China is going to be the leader now because they've got the all the trade set up and the all the initiatives set up to basically take over most of the world through just smarter warfare of that's economic based. And I get that. And of course, they devalue their currency and they treat their people like they've taken over world manufacturing and they treat their people like frickin' bugs. And you can get sort of in a very narrow focus when you're just looking at economics and yeah, see how that strategy and those numbers seem to pan out for China in the long run. However, for me, it just seems like a country that's going against natural law, that is poisoning its people with insane allopathic chemical remedies for health. I know there is traditional Chinese medicine and there is the Tao, and there's a spiritual contingent there in China that is battling that. But for the most part, talk about conventionalism, they are sort of US 1950s there, right? They're going through an economic boom. A lot of the populace believes in the sort of the China model for uh, economic and financial security, because a lot of them are now experiencing what folks in the West experienced 30, 40 years ago, this sort of mirage of abundance through capital inflows, building of cities, and all the corporate um, derived abundance, right? However, we see where that leads to, because we're seeing it in the United States with that dream having crumbled, and people waking up on the underground here, the revolutionaries here. I don't want to say revolutionaries, but the free thinkers here that are coming together based upon principles of universal law and a true deep understanding of what it means to be moral and to stand up for the proper rights of humankind. And in doing that, creating subset communities that are not playing in the conventional system. And so, for me, for those saying China is going to be the next world dominant force, or that there's going to be a bipolarity with US in the West and China in the East, I kind of see that all as part of the dark age system that is still trying to hold on to its last gasping breaths, and that we are moving into more of a decentralized, dispersed, and more of a network effect of humanity that will transcend national borders. And that's why, once again, I love the law, because the law is about a distributed morality that is based upon specific, inherent, transcendent truths that cannot be constricted by corporate governance or any sort of quote unquote ethics derived by authority, right? This is a post authority world I'm talking about. And that, to me, I don't hear a lot of people talking about it in the way that I'm envisioning it, in that we have anarchists, we've got voluntarists who talk about the law and the false authority imperative, or this idea that this idea of authority is not an actual truth, of course. But then a lot of times, those folks aren't necessarily grounded in the economics. There's no economic solution, right? They say it's the free market. But what does the free market rely upon? The free market relies upon money. And where does money get us? Money gets us back into Babylon. And with Babylon, we're sort of, it's like the snake eating its tail, or where with this concept, um, and that inherently brings back to government and to state structures, because you have, with money, you have a race to who has more, right? It becomes a scarcity model. It becomes a something like, oh God, what's his name from The Hobbit, the dragon, who has to hoard. Becomes a hoarder mentality. So there needs to be a balance between that extreme anarchist perspective, and then the more sort of holistic, um, spiritual sort of, uh, yeah, in individualized but yet community based aesthetic around what it means to be a community and to have um, consensus and leadership and, in the end, some sort of governance, because with that we can create new models for currency outside any traditional concept of money, so that we can have societies that are balanced, fair, moral, respectful, loving, like what we've supposedly heard of in the distant past of a place like where the Essenes resided, where they didn't have money, but they had social structure. It wasn't just built on a free market and contracts. I hope I'm kind of clear here. So, this is sort of the ideas that run through my head late at night when I'm trying to go to sleep. And how can we build a new model of currency that allows for exchange of ideas, exchange of capital, exchange of um, maybe capital is not the right word, but of creative output, of experience, so that we can have a thriving society that isn't just straight barter, so that we can um, exist across space and time in a way that traditional money has allowed us to do. And that's one of the fantastic elements of that invention of money without falling into the pitfalls of hoarder mentality, scarcity, and top down governance, or at least governance that is based upon controlling the money system. Now, a governance structure that is a circle, in other words, like think of the elder circle, where you've got those who have more of a say about certain things in society because they have experience, and it goes round and around through deliberation, and then that is filtered out through the village, and out of respect because the elders um, have done the work. That's an interesting model, and to embrace that model into a larger network is interesting. Um, Versus something like democracy, where you have the masses dictating the policy of governance, and the masses um, essentially looking to be, it's a bottom up but lowest common denominator type of governance. So where do we find balance within all this to have a society that is respectful of individual property, individual freedoms? And that's a whole other thing, individual property, right? Do you really have a right on this plane of existence to have your own individual property? Well, I would say yes. Um, you have, it is part of natural law to have ownership of your own mind, first and foremost, your own thoughts, and then the creations, the physical creations of those thoughts. But where does that get muddied in terms of owning property on a physical plane? Um, when there is a legacy of previous ownership, right? And oftentimes land that has been stolen from people through the use of this money system, um, via war and pillaging and lying and cheating and all that. These are all complex questions, of course, and there have been brilliant minds, uh, from Rousseau to Bart. God, blanking on his name, the great Austrian economist. Oh my goodness, brain fart. It'll come to me in a second. That have deliberated on, you know, the property rights. But how can we have a system that respects the individual and the individual's um, natural rights, we'll say, in conjunction with a community that is looking to live in harmony and do commerce, have communication, and have a sacred governance that fosters wisdom and growth in a way that is in connection with the divine, that is not manipulated and controlled by those very people that are trying to be part of the governance. I mean, these are the trickiest questions of political philosophy, from in really philosophy in general. And I think we should continue having these conversations as a community. But I think, yeah, a big part of this is figuring out the money thing, and in conjunction with governance. And so that's been a fun part of Qortal, in that we have a digital network that is sort of a simulacrum, a parallel representation of sort of a the way nature works, because all of nature is a network. It's a network of information and energy that is hyper connected in the field through nodes of consciousness. And those nodes of consciousness are layered from the mineral kingdom to the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom to us. And so they all have a specific value metric and a specific role to play deemed by the creator. And then with that, based upon sort of karmic duties and those roles that have been preset, that will, I also believe, progress forward. So I do believe in the progression from mineral into plant into animal into human, and human being the representation of all of the kingdoms. We then get certain responsibilities of governance. And also, if you get into Percival, who I talk about a lot on this channel, he talks about how we move out of our specific role as a human here to advance into a higher state of consciousness where we have even more responsibility of governance. Um, and so, over the entire uh, the living humans here, not over, excuse me, but uh, in conjunction with, as a guiding government body, because of the enlightened state of that individual, kind of like in Aristotelian terms, like the hierarchy, or if you want to think of like Steiner, this sort of hierarchy of the angels, right, and going up the celestial beings that have done the work to get out of um, the sin of ignorance, and thus should have a responsibility to help us, when we need help. And so that's an important part of governance. And so, do anarchists, and I consider myself an anarchist in many ways, but are they a little blind to, or short-sighted, I'll say, around this concept, thinking that just the free market is all we need? Um, and what is the free market? Have we ever even had a free market, I guess? But and yes, so getting back to, I guess, to this idea of the sacred and understanding the divine connection that we all have to a greater um, source of wisdom and knowingness, and then how we all are independent node here in the real network, and how we can all tap into that. And that's why we are the most powerful nodes of the network, because we can tap into the infinite knowingness. And then how do we apply that into like a representation onto a digital network as a counter to the centralized internet that the current wannabe controllers are setting up to create essentially a techno feudalistic state, right? Where you'll own nothing, and they say you'll be happy, but basically you'll essentially be surveilled at all times and limited in your freedoms to express yourself based on the economic, social, quote unquote, ethical constraints of a system that you're bound in. Uh, and it will be a jobless system, which is interesting. It very well may be a universal basic income in the same way the serfs of the classical feudal age were fed a paltry meal here and there. I mean, I know some serfs probably had it pretty good, but they lived for food and shelter. And it won't be much different, I guess, right? You'll get just enough trickling into your account so you can get your Soylent Green and access your virtual headset to go play into all the virtual worlds that are offered to you, while continuing to have all the data mined from any creative spark you show within these digital realms. And then also, probably there'll be gatekeepers there that won't even allow you to get into the more fun digital realms. And meanwhile, your soul is just withering away. The karmic repercussions of this will weigh heavily upon future lives. And I will say, I know that sounds like a really depressing possible future. And I don't personally see that future happening because of it is like any dark age, like the Catholic Church during the quote unquote traditionally known dark age of the um, Middle Ages. They had one of the most brilliant spy networks, surveillance systems ever created through the act of confession, and they collapsed thanks to just a couple bright minds that are willing to step out because they're creative free thinkers um, and face evil, stand up to quote unquote authority, and completely change the game, like a Martin Luther, um, and or like I'm trying to think of a couple of the alchemists that were like a Bruno, I guess, Giordano Bruno, who's was murdered for his ideas. You had, I mean, you could even say Shakespeare in some ways, and of course that is construed to be a quote unquote Renaissance, right? A Renaissance where coming out of the dark age of centralized control, individuals that aren't necessarily coming out of the centers of thought, in other words, academia or uh, the state, but are sort of rebels of thinking, um, break through with their just absolutely groundbreaking, innovative ideas. And because they're in alignment with the higher truth, and there is also a threshold, I think, that universal consciousness can take in terms of being enslaved, that those ideas just break through a contrived, controlling system. And then we have a quote unquote Renaissance, this idea of having the traditional European Renaissance that we all know about, the 14th century, 15th century, um, and with figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and of course you see those characters and you wonder, really, was that all contrived? And then moving forward, you have, in literary terms, other renaissances, I guess. You had sort of the romantic renaissance of the late 18th century, early 19th century, with like Goethe and Blake, and the ideas getting back to um, sort of the intuitive connection with the divine and getting out of this strict rational and intellect of the scientific age that it came out of the Renaissance. Uh, and then you sort of had even like the American Renaissance coming out of Walden, coming out of Thoreau, and those transcendentalists, poets and such that were rejecting Atlanticism and English hierarchy of literary thought and tapping back into the mystical side of nature. So we do get to see these sort of micro renaissances throughout history if you buy history. And so who's to say that we aren't on the cusp of one now? Um, I will say I do think it's pretty clear we've been in the dark ages for a bit, in terms of, I mean, you look at COVID, right? That could have been the apex of this specific cycle of the dark age. And um, so, what does the role of Qortal have to play? Well, once again, Qortal, Qortal, is a way to look at a digital network, and that's something more in alignment with nature, in the same way that transcendentalists did, um, and basically look at how a digital ecosystem can be set up with a governance around a more natural way of experiencing reality, that around just a consensus based on time. and based on community. One, proving themselves to the community through um, taking part in it, and whether that be starting a QTube channel or a Q blog, and then having an elder circle essentially be one of the main safeguards of the community to basically come together as a committee to um, recognize those who are contributing, sort of like a proof of contribution, and in relation to the amount of time that they've now committed running a node on the network to allow them to take a the next step forward in consensus as well. And so this is through sort of where minting has evolved on the network in comparison to something like proof of work, which is more sort of industrialized mechanical consensus that is very much in alignment with that anarcho crypto concept of just allowing the free market. It's very Austrian, of course, like the free market and allowing scarcity to run a system. And it's very secure, and it could very well um, see its vision come true in terms of Bitcoin lasting the attacks it's been getting, and being able to overcome the market forces that are slowly, essentially capturing all the Bitcoin. Qortal is not purely a cryptocurrency. Qortal is trying to be a living, breathing new internet network. It does have a cryptocurrency that is intertwined or plays through it based upon this time consensus called minting. But really, it's more about the actual network being a ecosystem for what you would do on the internet. So it's much, in many ways, bigger in scope, but also Qortal is, in many ways, it is. I know the developers will say this. It's much more decentralized than Bitcoin because of the way the nodes work. Um, it is resistant against pooling up of nodes like proof of work, where they will create mining pools that consolidate more and more the hash power. And that is something that a lot of Bitcoiners don't talk about. They will just talk about the mining, sort of where the mining is, and they don't break it apart according to the mining pools. So they'll say, US is now 51% of the mining of Bitcoin, and they'll break it up nationally like that. But within that, how many of them are pools that are combining their power together, and then that is corporatized into a company, and then that company is bought out by some sort of firm that is directly being controlled by BlackRock. BlackRock is the stakeholders in that company. Now they're controlling the mining. Meanwhile, they're also controlling the NFT or the NFTs, the financialization of Bitcoin, um, and EFTs, right? And essentially the derivative market that is essentially financializing and securitizing Bitcoin. So it's not basically about self custody of Bitcoin, but it's about tricking those that have self custody into giving up their Bitcoin in exchange for essentially mining fiat dollars um, in some, basically a a loan schema that allows them to 3x the value of your Bitcoin, right? It's the same thing we saw with like Bit Petite. You guys remember that? There's all these scams, and I fell for a couple of them. You Bitcoiners will know, where you put up your Bitcoin into this exchange's wallet, so you lose your custody, but then you get dividends every month. You make 10% dividend on your Bitcoin, interest on your Bitcoin. It's sort of like a fractional reserve Bitcoin bank. And then there's a rug pull, and it was all a Ponzi scheme just to get as much Bitcoin in their own custody. And then all of a sudden the server's gone. And where did the Bitcoin go? It's essentially what these these companies that Michael Saylor and stuff are falling for are doing. So, long story short, Qortal doesn't play in those games. It doesn't play in the market trading games. It's not a sole like money system like Bitcoin. It does actually support Bitcoin, which is cool. It has a fully decentralized self custody wallet, Electrum wallet, integrated in Qortal, so you can bring your Bitcoin in, and then you can cross-chain swap in the DEX for Court, and then you can use that Court in the ecosystem to tip, to cover uh, micro costs for sending, transactions. It's transaction based. So when you comment on something, when you post a reply to something, there's a tiny bit of Court cost because it does have a blockchain running on it, and that provides value for the currency itself as it's running the new decentralized internet. Um, so, anyways, my point here is that tomorrow we'll be getting online here. It'll be on Odysee, and then there is you can actually join on crowdcast.io if you want to be taking part in the conversation. It'll be at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, the 14th International Freedom Cells Conference, where Qortal and Freedom Cells are partnering together. It's really exciting because Freedom Cells now I got to give props to Derek and John for, seeing the value and being really um, ahead of the game here, because they were really one of the first I knew that to start Freedom Cells, an online, open source community using Buddy Boss, which is a WordPress open source solution for community connection online. I mean, way back in the day now, uh, and 14 years? Is that right? If this is the 14th International Conference, or maybe they do them twice a year. I don't know. I know it's been around for, I believe, at least 8 years. So super impressive. But yeah, to be sort of going the next step, right? Really being those innovators to see how important it is to get your online community into a fully distributed network that has its own ability to do commerce in a way that's very agorist in mindset. So it's not playing in the fiat debt system. It's not a debt-based system. It's not a system based on scarcity. It's based on abundance and collaboration and working together to create a new network for the people by the people. So tomorrow, join us if this interests you. The link will be in the notes here, and we'll be talking about sort of the vision for this community and how people in a very secure environment can now start um, basically collabing and communicating on solutions, just how Freedom Cells is what it's always been about, right? Sovereignty and self ownership, self governance, and essentially, it's also what's great is it's all about moving into the private, getting off the public systems, which are just corporate, ironically, in a way, conventionally seen as private because they're quote unquote corporations, but no more terms and conditions, no more giving your data to be sold, no more risking your information on shaky servers and World Wide Web connections and all that stuff. The domain provider is another one that goes out the window now with Qortal. So no more dealing with the freedomcells.org domain, even though I think they're going to be running that site still for a while. But and then with Qortal, you can come on, and it's of course permissionless and it's free, and you can essentially reserve. It does cost a couple Court. When I say it's free to just to get the software and jump into Qortal. There are some costs, like if you want to reserve a name or buy a name, it does permanently go on the blockchain. Of course, you can sell that name later down the line, but it is unique. So when you open up a new public address, you can then purchase a name that will be your identifier, and that will be the only name on the network ever, and that you can attach blogs to, websites to, QTube channel. You can have an entire array of content based on that name. And if anybody wants to tip you Court, they just need to know your name, not your long address. And so it's really cool in that way. And of course, that name could be anything. It's anonymous. There is no know your customer KYC involved. There are no centralized exchanges. There are no corporations involved. No trademarks. No VC capitalization from Silicon Valley. No board meetings. It's all just people volunteering and based upon how much work and effort they put in. Some have bigger roles than others, like the devs and the minting circle. Like I was saying, the elder sort of circle that the minting admins. But besides that, I mean, it's really a free all, free for all, early days internet type project, and I'm really excited about it. Censorship proof. So it's really all about self-governance and true sovereignty on in the digital age that we are in. And so, will this lead to a new renaissance, or is this just part of the greater renaissance? More likely, is how I see it, and I do believe that. So join us tomorrow, and then Jason Crow, who's the brilliant mind, who really is the founder of Qortal, who I had the blessing to be with since before Qortal even launched. So I've known Jason since 2008, 2017, working together on projects in person many times, speaking on stage together, deep in the trenches, actually on very stressful stuff. And so yes, I know him well. He's the real deal, and he'll be joining me at the People's Reset. It'll be we won't be there in person at Morelia, Mexico. We're doing a virtual, but that'll be Saturday, January 31st, where we'll be doing a presentation on Qortal. Very excited, guys. This has been now 7 years of my life dedicated to this project. I off and on, I've been taken away from it at times, focusing on other things, but I'm very devoted and to this project now. Again, I see this as a massive solution for all the problems that are coming down the pipeline with this evolving techno state. And yeah, join us tomorrow, and love you guys. And I will be back once again. I'm going to do a winter cast on a breathing currency, this idea I have around a breathing currency, and then also talking more about the Renaissance Dark Age concepts. I have some interviews coming up. Some of them had to be rescheduled, and I'm just sort of still getting my ducks in a row from the big exit from Alpha Vedic last November, which I'm talk about, the debt system. The biggest debt that one can have in the world is time debt. And so I have no regrets, but devoting so much of my time to a project that then just didn't deliver, and having to leave that and rebuild is harder than hitting rock bottom financially in an instant, I think, right? Having to rebuild and after dedicating 10 years of your life to something is an immense, very difficult process. And I've gone through a lot of deep troughs, we'll say, in the last month and a half. And then extreme highs too. And some would say I'm bipolar right now. But there's projects like Qortal and getting realigned with my partners at Music and Sky and with the web work I'm doing, and just really focusing on my mission of walking the talk and truly living in truth as much as I can. Empowers me every morning I wake up, and to be an example for my kids on what it means to be a truly embodied person on all facets, and to be as honest, dead honest as I can at all angles of my life, business, social, personal, is for me the number one priority. Love you guys. Talk to you next time. Hopefully see you tomorrow on that stream, 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. The brain fart cleared up. Actually, I guess it's good to smell your farts now. This is an inside joke, but hydrogen sulfide. I guess, is really good for your brain, and you release that through your gas. So you got to smell your farts to keep your neurological condition fit. But no, really quick, the brain farts cleared. Ludwig von Mises was the Austrian philosopher, economist I was forgetting about, and then Murray Rothbard, those two guys. So, anyways, yeah, don't forget to smell your farts, guys, and I'll see you next time.